The Vorthak were ancient beings who had lived for more than 100,000 years. They floated through space in massive crystal cities that moved slowly between different galaxies. These immortal creatures had seen countless civilizations grow powerful and then destroy themselves. To them, watching species rise and fall was just another boring day at work. Their ships were filled with advanced technology that could scan entire star systems from millions of miles away. When these scanners picked up signals from a small blue planet called Earth, the Vorthak barely paid attention. It looked like just another primitive world filled with simple creatures who hadn't figured out how to travel between stars yet. Captain Kira was one of the Vorthak commanders in charge of studying new worlds. She pulled up the data about Earth on her crystal viewing screen and shook her head. The planet was inhabited by two-legged creatures who called themselves humans. They still used crude rockets to barely reach their own moon. Their weapons were laughably weak compared to Vorthak technology. Most of them couldn't even agree on basic things like borders or resources. The intelligence reports showed human leaders with simple names like Jiwon, who ran a small country called South Korea. There was Minho, a general who commanded primitive aircraft. Nari worked as a scientist studying their own atmosphere, while Sora led civilian evacuations during natural disasters. To Captain Kira, these humans seemed completely ordinary and unremarkable. The Vorthak had conquered thousands of species across the galaxy. Some had been warrior races with incredible strength. Others possessed advanced technology or powerful psychic abilities. A few species could even manipulate time and space in limited ways. But every single one had eventually surrendered when faced with the overwhelming power of the Vorthak fleet. The immortal beings had perfected the art of conquest over tens of thousands of years. They would arrive with massive ships that blocked out the sun. Their weapons could turn mountains into dust and boil oceans in seconds. Most importantly, they were patient. Since they lived forever, the Vorthak could wait as long as needed for their enemies to realize that resistance was hopeless. Earth appeared to offer nothing special that would change this pattern. The humans had no natural armor like the rock creatures of Zentari. They couldn't breathe in space like the gas beings of the Veil Nebula. Their lifespans were incredibly short, lasting only about 80 years at most. They seemed fragile, emotional, and divided against each other. The Council of Eternals met in their great crystal chamber that floated in the center of their main city. 12 ancient Vorthak leaders discussed Earth's fate while reviewing the scanning data. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. There was no debate or disagreement. Every council member voted the same way they had voted thousands of times. Before Earth would be harvested within one solar rotation, which was about one Earth year. The humans would be given a chance to surrender peacefully. If they refused, the Vorthak would demonstrate their power by destroying a few major cities. After that, any remaining survivors would be relocated to work camps on distant mining worlds. Captain Kira began preparing invasion plans with complete confidence. She had no way of knowing that the Vorthak were about to make the biggest mistake in their long, immortal lives. The morning sky above Seoul suddenly turned dark as massive alien ships appeared without warning. The Vorthak fleet had arrived silently, their enormous vessels blocking out the sun as they positioned themselves in perfect formation around Earth. Within minutes, every radio, television, and internet connection on the planet received the same terrifying message. Commander Taeho was drinking his morning coffee at the Korean Defense Force headquarters when alarms started blaring throughout the building. He rushed to the communications center just as the alien transmission began playing on every screen. The voice was cold and emotionless, speaking simultaneously in Korean, English, Chinese, and hundreds of other human languages. The message was simple and brutal. The Vorthak identified themselves as the rulers of this galaxy. They informed humanity that Earth had been selected for resource harvesting. All humans had exactly 24 hours to surrender completely. Any resistance would result in the immediate destruction of major population centers. The transmission ended with coordinates where human leaders could send their surrender documents. Taeho stared at the screen in shock, but his military training quickly kicked in. He grabbed his phone and started making calls to every defense installation in South Korea. Within minutes, Similar conversations were happening in command centers around the world as military leaders tried to process what they had just witnessed. In the communications room next door, Officer Hannah was already working frantically at her computer station. She had been monitoring satellite feeds when the alien ships first appeared, and now she was trying to establish secure contact with other military bases around the globe. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she sent encrypted messages to allies in Japan, the United States, and European nations. Hannah's colleague, strategic analyst Yuna, was pulling up every piece of data they had about the alien vessels. She measured their size using satellite imagery and tried to count how many ships were positioned around the planet. The numbers were staggering. Each alien vessel was larger than the biggest aircraft carrier ever built by humans. There were hundreds of them floating silently in Earth's orbit, while government leaders held emergency meetings and tried to figure out how to respond to the ultimatum. Something unexpected was happening across the planet. Instead of panicking or preparing to surrender, humans began doing what they had always done when faced with impossible odds. They started fighting back. Military bases from Alaska to Australia went to their highest alert levels. Fighter jets scrambled into the sky, even though everyone knew they would be completely outmatched by alien technology. Radar operators tracked the alien ships, while communications officers tried to intercept and decode their transmissions. The Vorthak commanders watched these preparations with growing confusion. In their thousands of years of conquest, they had never seen a species react this way. Usually, primitive civilizations either surrendered immediately or tried to negotiate for better terms. Some attempted to hide or flee to other planets, but humans were doing something completely different. They were preparing for war against an enemy they couldn't possibly defeat. Scientists around the world dropped their regular research and focused entirely on analyzing the alien broadcasts. They studied the electromagnetic signatures of the alien ships, trying to understand their technology. Engineers began modifying existing weapons systems, hoping to find some way to fight back. Even ordinary citizens refused to simply wait for their fate to be decided. People stocked up on supplies, organized neighborhood watch groups, and prepared to defend their homes. Many had no idea how they could possibly fight against such advanced aliens, but they were determined to try anyway. The Vorthak had expected immediate surrender. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that seemed completely unable to accept the mathematical reality of their situation. The 24-hour deadline passed without a single surrender document being transmitted to the Vorthak coordinates. The alien commanders were mildly surprised but not concerned. They had dealt with stubborn species before. It was time to demonstrate their overwhelming power and force humanity into submission. The attack began at dawn in major cities across the planet. Vorthak ships descended from orbit like silent death, their energy weapons cutting through the morning sky in brilliant blue streaks. They targeted power plants, communication towers, airports, and military bases with surgical precision. Their goal was to cripple human civilization without completely destroying it, leaving the population helpless but alive to serve as workers. Lieutenant Sajin was stationed at a military observation post on a hill overlooking Seoul when the first alien ships appeared over the city. Through his binoculars, he watched in horror as beams of energy sliced through buildings like a hot knife through butter. The aliens moved with mechanical efficiency, destroying exactly what they intended to destroy, and nothing more. But something strange started happening almost immediately. Instead of the organized military response the Vorthak expected, chaos erupted everywhere. And this chaos seemed to work in humanity's favor in ways that made no logical sense. Down in the city, Mina had been teaching her third-grade class when the air raid sirens began wailing. As a teacher, she was trained in emergency procedures, but nothing had prepared her for an alien invasion. While other adults panicked and ran in circles, Mina quickly organized not just her students, but dozens of other children and families in her neighborhood. She remembered the old subway tunnels that connected beneath Seoul, many of them abandoned or forgotten. Within hours, Mina had turned these underground passages into a complete evacuation network. She posted handwritten signs in Korean at tunnel entrances, created safe routes that avoided the main stations where aliens might look, and set up supply depots using food from abandoned restaurants. The Vorthak had expected civilians to either flee the cities or hide in their homes where they could be easily located and controlled. Instead, they found empty buildings above ground, while thousands of humans moved freely through an underground maze that didn't appear on any of their scanning maps. Across town, Dongwu was facing his own crisis. His small auto repair shop had been his family's business for 20 years. When the invasion began, he could have simply closed up and tried to escape like many others. Instead, Dongwu did something that would have seemed insane to any rational observer. He decided to fight back. Using spare parts from cars and motorcycles, along with chemicals from his garage, Dongwu began building improvised explosive devices. He had learned basic electronics while fixing modern cars, and now he applied that knowledge in ways the original manufacturers never intended. His first bombs were crude and dangerous, but they worked. More importantly, Dongwu wasn't working alone. His neighbor Kyungmin was a chemistry teacher who understood how to make more stable explosives. Their friend Jaeho drove a delivery truck and knew every back road in the city. Soon, Dongwu's small repair shop had become the center of a growing resistance cell that could strike alien patrols and disappear into the urban landscape. The Vorthak had spent thousands of years developing perfect battle strategies. Their computer systems could predict enemy movements, calculate optimal attack patterns, and coordinate massive fleets across multiple star systems. These tactical algorithms had never failed against any species they had encountered, but humans weren't fighting according to any recognizable strategy. They seemed to make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They took incredible risks for no apparent gain. Most confusing of all, they kept fighting even when victory was clearly impossible. The immortal aliens found themselves completely unprepared for an enemy that treated warfare as organized chaos rather than a logical competition. 6 weeks had passed since the Vorthak began their invasion, and Captain Hyunwoo was starting to panic. This was not how conquests were supposed to go. By now the humans should have been completely defeated and ready to serve as workers in the Vorthak mining colonies. Instead, the situation on Earth was getting worse every single day. Hyunwoo sat in his command chair aboard the massive warship floating above the Pacific Ocean, staring at reports that made no sense. His forces controlled all the major cities, had destroyed most human military installations, and had cut off all major communication networks. According to every tactical manual the Vorthak had ever written, the war should have been over weeks ago, but somehow, the humans were not only still fighting, they were actually getting better at it. This was impossible. No species had ever improved their fighting capabilities while losing a war. Most civilizations became weaker and more desperate as defeats mounted. Humans seemed to do the exact opposite. The worst part was how quickly they learned to use Vorthak technology. Every time the aliens shot down a human aircraft or destroyed a resistance base, the humans would sneak back to salvage pieces from the wreckage. Then within days, they would figure out how to use those pieces against their former owners. In a small university laboratory in Tokyo, a 20-year-old physics student named Sora was doing something that should have been completely impossible. She had managed to get her hands on fragments of a destroyed Vorthak energy shield generator. Most alien technology was designed to be incomprehensible to primitive species. The Vorthak had built-in safeguards that were supposed to prevent anyone from reverse engineering their equipment. Sora didn't care about what was supposed to be impossible. She had been studying quantum mechanics and electromagnetic theory for 3 years. When she looked at the alien technology, she didn't see incomprehensible magic. She saw advanced applications of physical principles she already understood. It was like finding a more sophisticated version of technology she had been learning about in her classes. Working 18 hours a day in the basement of her bombed-out university, Sora carefully took apart each piece of alien hardware. She drew diagrams, ran experiments, and slowly began to understand how the energy shields worked. Within 2 weeks, she had built a crude but functional human version using car batteries, copper wire, and electronics salvaged from old computers. More importantly, Sora didn't keep this knowledge to herself. She uploaded detailed instructions to hidden internet servers that the Resistance had set up in underground bunkers. Soon, humans around the world were building their own energy shields using whatever materials they could find. Meanwhile, in a Resistance hideout beneath the ruins of Moscow, Gina was working on an even more dangerous project. She had been a computer programmer before the invasion, specializing in network security and communication systems. When the Vorthak began jamming all human radio and internet communications, Gina took it as a personal challenge. She had captured several alien communication devices during raids on Vorthak supply convoys. Instead of trying to use them to communicate with other humans, Gina focused on understanding how the alien communication network functioned. She discovered that the Vorthak used quantum entanglement to send messages instantly across vast distances. Even more interesting, their entire fleet used a single interconnected communication system. This was incredibly efficient, but it also created a massive vulnerability. If someone could figure out how to access the network, they could potentially disrupt communications for the entire invasion force. Gina spent weeks learning to decode alien transmission protocols. She built her own quantum communication device using parts from destroyed Vorthak equipment and electronics stolen from abandoned science laboratories. When she finally managed to hack into their network, she didn't just listen to their messages. She began sending false information, jamming their signals and creating chaos in their command structure. Captain Hyunwoo was receiving reports of communication failures across his entire fleet. Orders were being lost, contradictory commands were appearing from nowhere, and coordination between different ships was breaking down completely. His technical officers assured him that their communication system was impossible to hack, but the evidence suggested otherwise. What terrified the Vorthak most was how quickly human resistance was spreading. Every defeat seemed to create 10 new fighters. Every human they killed was replaced by family members, friends, or complete strangers who took up the fight. The aliens had expected desperation and despair. Instead, they found determination that grew stronger with each passing day. 3 months after the invasion began, the war had transformed into something the Vorthak had never experienced before. The surface world belonged to the aliens. There, massive ships patrolled the skies, while robotic sentries walked through empty streets. Every major government building, military base, and communication center was under their direct control. By all logical measures, Earth should have been completely conquered. But beneath the surface, a different world existed entirely. In the dark tunnels, abandoned basements, and forgotten underground spaces of every major city, humanity had built a second civilization dedicated entirely to resistance. Nari had become the master of this underground world without ever planning to. Before the invasion, she had worked as a city planner in Seoul, focusing on transportation infrastructure. She knew every subway tunnel, maintenance passage, and utility corridor in the city. When the bombing started, this knowledge became humanity's greatest asset. Working with teams of volunteers, Nari had mapped out an entire underground supply network that connected resistance cells across hundreds of miles. Old subway tunnels became highways for moving weapons and supplies. Abandoned stations turned into weapons factories and medical centers. Storm drains and sewer systems provided secret routes that allowed fighters to appear anywhere in the city without warning. The Vorthak had scanners that could detect most forms of life and technology from orbit, but their sensors were designed to find organized military installations and large gatherings of people. They couldn't track small groups moving through narrow underground passages or detect equipment hidden behind concrete and steel infrastructure. Nari had organized everything like a massive underground railroad. Supplies would enter the network at one point and travel through dozens of different tunnels before reaching their destination. Even if the aliens discovered one route, 20 others remained operational. Food, medical supplies, weapons, and ammunition flowed constantly through this hidden world. In Busan, Minji was solving a different but equally important problem. As a former social worker, she understood how to help people survive in desperate situations. When the bombing destroyed entire neighborhoods, thousands of families found themselves homeless and afraid. Instead of trying to flee to refugee camps, where the Vorthak could easily find them, Minji began hiding them in plain sight. She had discovered that bombed-out buildings could actually provide excellent shelter if you knew how to use them properly. A building that looked completely destroyed from the outside might still have solid basements or interior rooms that could house dozens of people. More importantly, the aliens tended to ignore areas they had already destroyed, assuming nothing important could be hiding there. Minji established safe houses throughout the city using this strategy. Each location had multiple escape routes, hidden supply caches and communication equipment that allowed constant contact with other resistance cells. She trained civilians in basic survival skills, taught them how to move silently through rubble, and organized them into support networks that could care for wounded fighters or orphaned children. What made her safe houses special was how normal they appeared. During the day, they looked like empty ruins that had been thoroughly destroyed, but at night, they became bustling centers of resistance activity. People would emerge from hidden rooms to repair equipment, plan operations, and coordinate with other cells before disappearing again before dawn. The Vorthak were discovering that controlling a planet's surface meant very little when the real war was happening in places they couldn't see. Every time they captured a human fighter, 2 more would appear somewhere else. Every time they destroyed a resistance base, the humans would rebuild it in a new location within days. What frustrated the aliens most was how the humans treated captured Vorthak soldiers. Instead of simply killing them or trying to trade them for prisoners, the resistance had developed systematic methods for extracting information. They learned alien patrol routes, communication codes, equipment weaknesses, and tactical procedures. Each captured enemy became a treasure trove of intelligence that made future operations more effective. The immortal beings began to realize they weren't fighting against a traditional military force. They were fighting against an idea that seemed to infect every human it touched. The concept that freedom was worth any sacrifice, that dignity mattered more than survival, and that some principles were worth dying for. This idea spread through the human population like a virus that the Vorthak couldn't cure or contain. It turned ordinary people into fighters, transformed civilians into soldiers, and made everyone a potential threat to the occupation. General Korthak stood in his command chamber, staring at tactical displays that showed something he had never seen in his 50,000 years of military service. For the first time in his incredibly long life, his forces were actually losing ground to a primitive species. The red markers indicating Vorthak-controlled territory were slowly shrinking, while blue markers representing human resistance continued to spread across the planet. He had conquered over 1,000 different worlds and subdued hundreds of alien species. Some had been warrior races with natural weapons and incredible strength. Others possessed advanced technology that rivaled Vorthak engineering. A few had even developed powerful psychic abilities that could manipulate matter with pure thought. But every single one had eventually surrendered when faced with the mathematical reality of defeat. Humans were different in a way that defied all logic. They had transformed their entire planet into a weapon aimed at the occupying forces. In New York, resistance fighters had rigged the subway system with explosives that could collapse entire city blocks on command. In London, they had turned the old sewer network into a maze of deadly traps that claimed dozens of Vorthak soldiers every day. But the most terrifying human tactic was something they called heaven runs. Captain Bomi had organized these operations from a hidden base beneath the ruins of Tokyo. She was a former airline pilot who had lost her family in the initial bombing raids. Instead of seeking revenge through conventional warfare, Bomi had developed a strategy that turned human aircraft into guided missiles. The plan was simple and horrifying. Volunteer pilots would load their planes with explosives and fly them directly into Vorthak command ships. They called these missions heaven runs because the pilots knew they would die in the process. What shocked General Korthak was that humans were actually volunteering for these suicide missions faster than Bomi could organize them. Every morning, dozens of pilots would line up outside her recruitment center, asking to be assigned to the next heaven run. They weren't desperate soldiers with nothing left to lose. Many were ordinary people who had never flown military aircraft before the invasion. Teachers, mechanics, students, and retirees all insisted on learning to fly just so they could sacrifice their lives in attacks against the alien fleet. The Vorthak had lived for thousands of years precisely because they were careful. Immortality was precious beyond measure, and losing it was the worst fate imaginable. Their military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force and minimal risk. They used robotic drones whenever possible, stayed far from dangerous situations, and always had multiple escape plans ready. This cautious approach had served them well against every other species they had encountered. Most aliens also valued their lives highly and would surrender rather than face certain death. But humans seemed to view death completely differently. They didn't fear it, avoid it, or even treat it as a defeat. Instead, they celebrated it when it served a greater purpose. Each successful Heaven run destroyed millions of credits worth of Vorthak equipment and killed dozens of irreplaceable Immortal soldiers. But from the human perspective, it only cost them one volunteer pilot and a primitive aircraft that could be replaced within days. The mathematics of this exchange rate were devastating for the alien forces. What made the situation even worse was how each human death seemed to inspire more resistance rather than less. When news of a successful Heaven run spread through the underground networks, recruitment for the next mission would increase dramatically. Humans would hold memorial services for the dead pilots that somehow turned into recruitment rallies for future suicide attacks. General Korthak couldn't understand this psychology at all. In Vorthak culture, death was the ultimate failure. It meant you had been careless, unprepared, or unlucky. The idea that someone would deliberately choose death for any reason was completely incomprehensible. His Immortal commanders had begun refusing dangerous assignments, requesting transfers to safer positions, and even asking to be reassigned to different star systems entirely. They had spent millennia avoiding risk, and the thought of facing an enemy that embraced death terrified them more than any weapon or technology. Meanwhile, the humans continued to treat each loss as fuel for continued resistance. Every destroyed building became a monument to their determination. Every dead fighter became a symbol that inspired 10 more recruits. The Vorthak were discovering that when fighting an enemy that didn't fear death, immortality could become a terrible weakness. 8 months into what should have been a simple conquest, the impossible was happening across planet Earth. Strategic positions that the Vorthak had held since the first week of invasion were falling back into human hands. Command centers that had been considered absolutely secure were being overrun by resistance fighters, using weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate alien defenses. In her hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Sol, strategic analyst Una had become something the Vorthak never expected to face. A human who could predict their moves better than they could predict hers. Using salvaged alien computers and communication equipment, she had spent months studying Vorthak tactical patterns, learning their decision-making processes, and mapping their weaknesses. What Una discovered changed everything about how the HFY resistance fought the war. The Vorthak weren't actually as brilliant as they appeared. They were simply very, very old. After thousands of years of successful conquests, they had developed standard procedures for every situation. Their battle plans were incredibly sophisticated, but they were also completely predictable once you understood the patterns. The aliens always established command posts in the highest buildings available. They always positioned their supply depots, exactly 2.3 kilometers from their main bases. Their patrol routes followed mathematical formulas that optimized coverage while minimizing risk to their forces. Everything they did was logical, efficient, and utterly consistent. Una began sharing this information with resistance cells around the world. For the first time since the invasion began, humans stopped reacting to alien moves and started anticipating them. They could predict where the next patrol would be, when supply convoys would arrive, and which buildings would be targeted for occupation. But knowledge alone wasn't enough to win battles. The humans still needed weapons that could actually damage Vorthak equipment. This is where human creativity became their greatest advantage over alien technology. In a bombed-out construction yard in Manchester, 18-year-old Daewon was proving that age and experience meant nothing when survival was at stake. Before the invasion, he had been a university student studying mechanical engineering. Now he was leading one of the most successful sabotage units in the European resistance. Daewon's specialty was turning ordinary construction equipment into weapons of war. He had discovered that the plasma cutters used to slice through steel, beams could be modified to penetrate Vorthak armor plating. Industrial welding equipment, when properly converted, could generate electromagnetic pulses that disrupted alien electronics. His most ambitious project involved converting a massive construction crane into a weapon capable of destroying Vorthak aircraft. By mounting salvaged alien energy weapons on the crane's arm and programming its movement systems with targeting software stolen from downed alien fighters, Daewon created something that was part construction equipment and part military installation. The module plan he developed for attacking the main Vorthak supply depot seemed completely insane to anyone who heard it. The depot was surrounded by energy barriers, defended by robotic sentries, and monitored by sensors that could detect approaching aircraft from hundreds of miles away. It was considered the most secure alien installation in Europe. Daewon's solution was to attack using vehicles that the alien sensors weren't programmed to recognize as threats. He gathered a convoy of bulldozers, excavators, cement mixers, and garbage trucks. Each vehicle was modified with armor plating made from salvaged alien materials and equipped with weapons built from construction tools and captured enemy equipment. The attack began at dawn on a Tuesday morning. To the Vorthak sensors, it looked like a group of construction vehicles was approaching to begin cleanup work in the area. By the time the aliens realized these were actually weapons platforms, the convoy was already inside their defensive perimeter. Daewon's bulldozer crashed through the main gate, while cement mixers launched improvised explosives at guard towers. Excavators used their hydraulic arms to tear apart defensive barriers, while garbage trucks dumped loads of armed resistance fighters directly into the compound. The entire battle lasted less than 30 minutes. When it was over, the humans had captured enough alien technology and supplies to equip resistance cells across 3 countries. More importantly, they had demonstrated that even the most secure Vorthak positions could be overrun using creativity and unconventional tactics. General Korthak received the report about the depot attack with growing horror. His forces had been defeated by construction equipment operated by primitive humans who barely understood their own technology. The mathematical models that had guided Vorthak's strategy for millennia were proving useless against an enemy that refused to behave logically. The immortal beings were discovering that their greatest weakness wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their inability to think like mortals who had nothing left to lose. The evacuation orders came down from Vorthak High Command on a cold morning in late autumn, exactly 11 months after the invasion had begun. For the first time in their species' recorded history, the immortal conquerors were abandoning a conquest. Ships that had arrived with the confidence of inevitable victory were now preparing to flee from a primitive world that had somehow become too dangerous to occupy. General Korthak stood in his command chamber, watching the tactical displays that showed the complete collapse of their position on Earth. Red zones indicating Vorthak control had shrunk to tiny islands around their major landing sites. Everything else had fallen back into human hands, and even those remaining positions were under constant attack. The final blow had come 3 days earlier, when human forces had simultaneously struck 12 major Vorthak installations across 6 different continents. The coordination required for such an operation should have been impossible for a species without faster-than-light communication technology. Yet, somehow, the humans had managed to synchronize attacks that destroyed months of careful preparation in a single devastating hour. As the evacuation ships loaded the last of the Vorthak ground forces, Commander Wu Jin sent a final transmission from his hidden bunker somewhere beneath the ruins of Seoul. The message was broadcast on all frequencies that the aliens monitored, ensuring that every Vorthak ship would receive it as they prepared to flee Earth's solar system. Wu Jin's voice was calm and steady as he spoke, but his words carried a weight that would haunt the immortal beings for centuries to come. To the Vorthak fleet preparing to leave our world, he began, we want you to understand why you lost this war. You came here thinking that your immortality made you superior to us. You believed that because you live forever, you were stronger than beings who live for only a few decades. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. But you made a fundamental error in your calculations. You fear death, so you cannot truly live. We embrace death so we know what life is worth. Every day that we wake up breathing is a gift that we earned by surviving another night. Every moment we spend with our families is precious because we know it won't last forever. General Korthak found himself listening to the transmission despite himself. In all his thousands of years of existence, no conquered species had ever spoken to him with such confidence. Usually defeated enemies begged for mercy or threatened revenge they could never achieve. This human was doing something completely different. He was explaining, as if teaching a lesson to students who had failed to understand basic concepts. You looked at our planet and saw names in your files, Wu Jin continued. Leaders like Jiwon who commanded our armies even when victory seemed impossible. Scientists like Sora who unlocked the secrets of your technology using nothing but determination and intelligence. Organizers like Nari who built supply networks that kept our resistance alive in the darkest tunnels of our cities. Fighters like Hana who turned herself into a living weapon because she believed freedom was worth any sacrifice. The transmission crackled with static as Wu Jin's equipment struggled to reach the departing alien ships. But these weren't just names to us. They were individuals who chose to risk everything they had for something greater than themselves. Each one represented thousands more just like them. People who understood that a short life lived with purpose is infinitely more valuable than an eternal existence spent in fear. Inside the Vorthak command ships, immortal beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations found themselves struggling to comprehend what they were hearing. They had always viewed mortality as the ultimate weakness. Death was the failure that ended all possibilities, the defeat that could never be reversed. But humans seemed to view death as a tool, a resource that could be spent to achieve goals that mattered more than individual survival. They didn't fight to preserve their lives. They fought to preserve their way of life, their values, their freedom to choose their own destiny. Your immortality became your weakness, Wu Jin explained, his voice growing stronger as the transmission neared its end. Because you have forever, nothing is urgent. Because you cannot die, nothing is precious. Because you fear loss, you cannot risk everything for victory. We won this war because we understood something you never could, that mortality is not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be embraced. As the last Vorthak ships disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them the survivors of humanity's first galactic war, the silence that followed Wu Jin's transmission was absolute. The immortal beings had learned a lesson that would reshape their understanding of the universe itself. They had encountered a species that had weaponized the very thing that should have made them weak, and in doing so had proven themselves stronger than beings who lived forever. The last Vorthak ship disappeared into the darkness of space on a Tuesday morning, leaving behind a planet that would never be the same. As the alien vessels retreated beyond Earth's solar system, they carried with them something more dangerous than any weapon, a story that would spread terror throughout the galaxy for thousands of years to come. Admiral Zexthon, the highest-ranking Vorthak commander to survive the failed conquest, transmitted an emergency message to every civilized world in their galactic network. The transmission was marked with the highest priority codes, ensuring it would reach the leadership of every species that had ever dealt with the Vorthak Empire. The message was simple, but terrifying. Earth was to be declared a forbidden zone. Immediately, no ship, probe, or communication was to be directed toward the human homeworld under any circumstances. Any species that attempted contact with the humans would be considered enemies of the Vorthak Empire and face immediate retaliation. But this wasn't a warning born out of respect or diplomatic courtesy. This was a quarantine notice issued out of pure fear. The Vorthak had encountered something on Earth that challenged everything they thought they knew about power, warfare, and survival itself. The official report filed with Vorthak High Command described humans as a Category Omega threat, a classification that had never been used before in their species' history. The humans possessed no advanced technology that the Vorthak couldn't match or surpass. They had no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, and no inherent physical advantages. By every logical measure, they should have been easily conquered. Yet, somehow these primitive beings had developed the most dangerous weapon the galaxy had ever seen, a complete willingness to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, for abstract concepts that couldn't be measured or quantified. Freedom, dignity, honor, love, these weren't resources that could be captured or territories that could be conquered. They were ideas that lived in the minds of individual humans and grew stronger every time someone died defending them. The Vorthak warning spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Ancient species that had ruled star systems for millions of years suddenly found themselves afraid of a small blue planet on the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm. The message was clear. Humanity was not to be contacted, approached, or even observed from a distance. But on Earth itself, something remarkable was happening. The humans who had survived the invasion weren't content to simply rebuild their shattered cities and return to their old lives. The war had changed them in fundamental ways that even they didn't fully understand yet. G1, now promoted to Supreme Commander of Earth's Global Defense Force, stood in the rebuilt command center in Seoul, looking up at the stars through reinforced windows. For the first time in human history, they knew for certain that they were not alone in the universe. More importantly, they knew that other species could be defeated. Scientists like Sora had spent the months after the invasion studying every piece of alien technology they could find. Human engineers were already building spacecraft based on Vorthak designs, but with crucial improvements that reflected human values rather than alien efficiency. These ships prioritized crew safety over maximum firepower, included escape pods for every crew member, and featured redundant life support systems that could keep humans alive even in the worst possible scenarios. Nari had been appointed to lead the new global underground network, a permanent system that connected every major city on Earth through hidden tunnels and supply routes. Never again would humanity be caught unprepared for invasion. The infrastructure that had saved them during the war was now being expanded and improved to protect future generations. But perhaps the most significant change was in how humans viewed themselves and their place in the galaxy. They had proven something that no other species had ever managed to prove, that mortality could be stronger than immortality, that temporary existence could defeat eternal life, and that beings who knew they would die could accomplish things, that beings who lived forever never dared to attempt. The humans began looking toward the stars not as refugees hoping to escape their problems, but as a species ready to take their place among the galactic community. They had learned that their greatest weakness, the brief span of their individual lives, was actually their most powerful strength. In the years that followed, human spacecraft would begin exploring nearby star systems, carrying with them the same determination that had defeated the Vorthak invasion. Other species would learn to fear the approach of human ships, not because of their weapons or technology, but because of the terrifying willingness of their crews to risk everything, for causes greater than themselves. The galaxy would never be the same. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.